Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another amazing, wonderful, splendiferous episode of Blood, Sweat, and Strife, the coolest podcast around. Today we got a little bit of a change of pace. We usually cover a lot of historical deep dives, current events, politics, sometimes media, but today we have a very interesting and special guest. Our guest today is a member of the 501st, a nonprofit charity Star Wars themed costume collective. He's an advocate for women in cosplaying spaces and ardent feminist, and we are very excited to have him today. Say your name and pronouns.
Hello, my name is Rex. My pronouns are he, him, and I've been a member of the 501st Legion for almost 10 years.
Yeah. Rex, well, first of all, my name is May, and my pronouns are she, they. I realize I forgot to say that initially.
No worries.
But yeah, Rex is a fascinating person. He has had a lot of experiences in cosplaying and just general nerd communities. And today we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but it's all going to have the overarching theme of how these spaces can often be very patriarchal and misogynistic. And since Rex has a very good feminist analysis on these topics, I just thought it would be awesome to pick his brain on these for a little while.
Take away.
Yeah. So before we get into all of the different things that we wanted to talk about, I wanted to begin with a story about gender bending and creepy experiences that Rex communicated to me a little while ago. And I was just like, this is such an amazing story. You need to tell it on the podcast. So take it away.
Okay, so a few years ago, I did an event in San Diego. And at this event, there was a vendor I would previously have a lot of contact. This vendor would sell collectibles, like really high-end stuff, Transformers, Star Wars, stuff that would be really hard to get a hold of. And I've never once had an issue with it. I've always had very fond experiences, some banter with this guy. But when I started relaying this to friends who also dealt with him, they said he doesn't treat them the same. And this is where the gap kind of happened with my communication and his. So if you were a guy, you would have really pleasant experiences. But if you were a woman, he would tend to talk differently to you, approach you differently, very sexist views, and otherwise very disrespectful. But you wouldn't know this looking at the guy. He was a very jolly person in my experiences, so I didn't really consider the fact that he could have been like this when I wasn't around. So one of my closer friends, she had a terrible experience with him getting a hold of collectibles she wanted, which was from the Star Wars line. She wanted a statue of Captain Rex from a certain line. It was a pricey enough statue. He was willing to give her a discount for a favor, and this was done privately. He said this to her privately, and because she said no, he started hostile, very aggressive, and she really wanted to get a hold of the statue. So I wasn't aware he was treating her like this. I decided, right, okay, how do we best go about approaching him? My first attempt was to talk to him directly. He denied everything, denied even knowing her, and that this conversation even took place. So I said, right, okay, he just blatantly lied. I had screenshots. He said that wasn't him, doesn't know what that was, but he continued to be really negative towards her and other women in the space. So when she tried to confront him again, he just had a massive backlash with her. He just got really aggro out of the blue, which was completely unlike this person I've grown to know. So we decided on the second day we were going to do a costume switch. I'm usually in my stormtrooper or one of the Star Wars troopers. I decided to give that to my friend, and I was going to put a pair of latex breasts on and get into a gender bend of Spider-Gwen, I think it was. And once I got into the costume, I went over to the table, and immediately he was very into the shape of the costume. He was very, very forward. I mean, he was offering me exclusive deals on things I really didn't have an interest. And in my head, I'm going, why is he acting so different to what I normally am used to? So he was
Yeah.
offering exclusive deals on a Captain Rex figure that he got in. It was a statue. I was like, okay, that's the one she wants. So with the voice changer, it wasn't a great one, but was convincing enough to him apparently that he was willing to knock off, I think it was 100 off the price, which would drop it down to
Mm.
$60. I was like, great, I'll take it at 60. And he asked me, and what else do you want to take? Like, whoa, okay, very forward. And
Yeah.
I rolled with it for a while, and he walked with me around the con, and little gestures where he'd point towards some of the stalls, some of the exhibits that were at this con. And every time he pointed, his hand would go places it really shouldn't have. And again,
Okay.
in my head, I'm thinking, I used to have very pleasant experiences with this guy over buying stuff, Star Wars related, or in general. Why is he suddenly like this? Where did this come from? How long has he been doing? This was going over my head repeatedly as I was walking around with him. Then he offered that if I want to go for a bite to eat, he would pay for the meal. I was
Okay.
quite overwhelmed with this. This was not something I never expected to hear from this man. So after doing a lap of the event, and his hands were going places it really shouldn't, he wanted a hug. And he asked me what I want to eat at the place we were going. So I said, like, whatever. And he suggested they do a really good deep dish pizza. And as he leaned in for the hug, he rubbed against the voice changer, causing it to unplug itself. So when he leaned in, I said, pizza would be great, mate. And he cut me this look and he did a U turn. And that he says he's not into that. He is not into trans and starts going on this mini rant as he's walking towards the revolving doors. I tried to get his attention and I was more concerned about this pizza that I was promised. And this guy goes into the revolving doors at such a speed that they stall. They get stuck. So he's stuck in the revolving doors trying to push them. And this guy is a very die-hard Star Wars fan, so it made it even better when you have Vader and two stormtroopers quietly judging him as he's stuck in the revolving doors. He gets down on his knees and starts crying that he's not into this. This is not something he does. And he's just constantly looking at Vader, who's just standing there, stoic and unmoving. It was just overwhelmingly funny that this guy went from someone I knew or thought I knew personally, had a good vibe with Jolly, to being a degenerate behind the scenes and acting this way, towards women. But this was an ongoing thing I had previously never even thought could be a thing, where being in that
Yeah.
space, that just how much shit you'd have to deal with if you're being a woman at these larger events, and just how subtle these things can happen. Now, not every woman's going to experience it, and not every con has it. Some cons are very good at dealing with it or cracking down on the creepy people or creepy vendors or experiences. But it never occurred to me that these things could actually happen, and it could come from literally anyone. But how subtle he was with his
Yeah.
gestures, how subtle and clever he was where he placed his hand, where he was putting his hand and then pointing. But as he was pointing, he would pull you in for a hug. He would pull you in, and it was weird, like overdoing the gesture. And from my experience, like being with the public in a stormtrooper, one of the bigger rules when in the 501st in a stormtrooper is you physically can't put your hand on anyone without consent. More
Yeah.
importantly, mobility. A stormtrooper isn't as mobile as you think it would. So, like, to me, this was all really strange behavior coming from someone at his stature. He's a vendor. So if this was a vendor that was doing, what if it was like another cosplayer? What if it was a cosplay group? So it really put things in perspective. And then seeing the guy stuck in the revolving door crying was just the icing on the cake.
Yeah. I wanted to lead with this story because I think it really tells us like two things about these communities. First of all, men, especially nerdy men, can be very insecure
They can be.
about their sexuality and the things that they are attracted to. The second thing that I think this story really highlights is that men and women in these spaces get treated very differently from each other. Like if you are a man in a nerdy cosplaying video game, anime, Star Wars space, whatever, you will probably not really have any problems for the most part. You will be able to enjoy these events, go to these conventions, check out the artist alleys, see the people that you want to see, and you aren't going to be getting a lot of unwanted attention. However, if you are a woman, especially a conventionally attractive woman, especially a woman in cosplay who is expected to do very sexualized costumes a lot of the time, you're going to get a lot of attention from men that you don't necessarily want. And it can go to a lot of really scary places. I think that over the course of like talking to you over these past couple of months, because we've been chatting for a little bit now, what I've gathered is that nerd communities can be very weird and they can attract a lot of weird types of people. That's not to say that everybody in these communities is bad or people to watch out for, but in these communities that are pretty insular and focused on specific things, which in the past were marketed almost exclusively towards boys and young men. You're going to get a lot of strange, maladaptive, creepy behaviors because of how these people were shaped by this media, but also because of how patriarchy shapes us.
True. With these communities, what I've noticed in my own experience, if you think of the food pyramid and like all the stuff in abundance, like that you usually take, the trashier foods are at the bottom and that's wider. And as you get to the top, it narrows. If you put it in reverse and the start of your fandom, the start of whatever you're into, whatever genre you're into, Star Wars or anime or video games, at the top, getting into it at a kind of loose level where you're not too invested in it is probably the safer bet. You're just meeting other like-minded people who have an interest in it, but they're not too invested. And it's probably the safest space. But the further you go down and the more that down a rabbit hole. And in this rabbit hole, you're going to encounter more weird kind of niches, more weird types of fans who might take the thing a bit too far. They might be too invested. And it happens in every kind of group, not just like Star Wars gets a lot of shit for it, and rightfully so. There is some really toxic Star Wars fans. But it happens in every kind of corner of like nerd culture. You would get it in video games like Halo, you would get it in anime, you would get it in most of them. And you're always going to get one bad apple, might just, ruin the vibe for you. But when you get into these groups, it's important that you communicate this when you're going into these groups. So, like 501st Legion, a lot of them are either diehard Star Wars fans that put a lot of time into the group, or they're heavily invested. Whereas you might just know Star Wars, say, from the movies or the occasional TV show or episode. You wouldn't be too invested. But the further you go down that rabbit hole, the more weird things you'll start seeing. Like a few years ago, there was this thing with Princess Leia's costume in Star Wars Return of the Jedi, the metal bikini. I don't want to say the actual name for it, but you would get a lot of nerds who would lose their marbles over seeing any woman cosplaying that specific costume. And whereas, yeah, there's a lot of skin on show, but you would get people who would say really inappropriate things. But because of the niche, because of the groups you're in, some are totally fine with these words being used and that viewpoint. And on the other side of that coin, a woman should be okay to wear whatever she feels she wants to wear and has the confidence to wear it without being a target of the male gaze for that reason.
Yes.
So, like, if you look at the amount of costumes from, say, old school Star Wars, and then you look at the newer stuff, there's a big change in what you deem was wearable. Like, there's a costume reference library. I recommend people look at it for the 501st. It holds every single costume that's ever been kind of created from the movies, and it's interesting to look at seeing the variety and the differences between what was considered expanded universe older stuff and the newer stuff. There's a big difference. But using that as an example, you'd get the same kind of treatment with anime costumes. Some anime costumes can be extremely revealing. And when you go to these cons and you go into these communities, it's almost always going to be a bit weird when you're stepping first into them. You might get a positive reaction, but the deeper you go, not all the time, some communities can be very welcoming, very friendly. It's just you will encounter some weirdos, and these weirdos can escalate things. So there was
Yeah.
one case, and this was in the UK. We did a small event in the UK, and a girl it was her first time being at a large Comic Con. She always attended smaller college run events, which were fine. This was her first large scale Comic Con, and she went there as a character from Kill La Kill, I believe. I'm not familiar with the characters' names, but there was a lot of skin on show. And
Mm-hmm.
from the start of the event for her, she was walking through, a lot of people taking photographs with her, but she was getting a lot of unwanted attention. And guys staring, guys were being a bit weird. Not everyone was a bit weird. Some did offer if she needed a secure place to change or a quiet room, which was very nice, that she has that option. She didn't think she needed to make use of it. She thought she was going to be okay. Then later in the day, a guy kind of made her the focus of his attention and followed her
Mm.
around the con, followed her upstairs, followed her back
Yeah.
downstairs, followed her outside. And her dad was in the 501st. So she came over to her dad
Mm.
and said that this guy is being really, really weird. He has followed me for the past hour and a half, upstairs and downstairs. He's been insisting on wanting to communicate and wanted to know what her Discord was, etc. The
Okay.
dad took her into the 501st changing room, which is a secure place. She is around good people. She was going to be safe in there. But the guy came by the table and he waited by the 501st table for this girl to reemerge. He insisted
Yeah.
that he was her friend. He insisted that he was here to take photographs, that he was the photographer for her. And the dad, being tuned in, knew that he was there by herself. That was her big mistake. She went to our first con because she had no issues prior. She went to her first big convention by herself. So he was an
Yeah.
easy target for some of these guys that might seek her out. You won't always get them. And I'm not saying all of them are bad, but when you're there on your own in such a costume, you are bound to get some weird reactions. And it's
Yeah.
important then to go to these events with a close knit group of friends and have someone
Mm-hmm.
there to help you in case these things do happen. And more often than not, they will happen. And it's important to protect yourself. It's important to know what you can do when you fall into these situations, how to best handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have known a couple of different cosplayers throughout my life, and especially the cosplayers I've known who have been women, they all have experiences like these. They all have experiences of being followed by creepy fucking guys. They all have experiences of being very scared and feeling unsafe in these conventions. And something that I picked up on years ago was that a lot of the men in these spaces will always say stuff like, "Oh, why don't more girls participate in these interests? Why don't girls want to come out to these events that I'm coming out to?" And oftentimes it's because these spaces are extremely hostile and sometimes even dangerous towards women because there's a lot of patriarchal misogyny in these communities. There's a lot of entitlement to women's bodies in these communities. And this is kind of getting into like my own analysis a little bit. But I feel like a lot of this like sense of entitlement and this sense of really just like thinking that you can treat people this way comes from consuming a lot of media and a lot of like, I guess you could call it like content in the algorithm, where it's like your type of woman is just a click away on the internet. You can go and see whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want it. Sometimes it's a paid service, other times it's free. And I think that like the sorts of weird like maladaptive behaviors that we see towards women is not only the consequence of like patriarchy, but also that patriarchy being baked into the algorithm and baked into the media that these men consume. And I don't want it to seem like I'm saying that like all Star Wars media or like all Lord of the Rings media or all of this nerd media in general is misogynistic and patriarchal by nature. But in appealing to these specific types of fans, with these specific affinities, the media itself that's being pushed is part of the problem. But yeah, we see this all the time. Like men are often feel a sense of ownership and entitlement over women's bodies, and that manifests in a lot of really creepy behavior.
Like in these Comic-Con spaces and cosplay specifically, they're going to have guys and they go in with the noble intentions. They don't go in there thinking, oh, I'm going to sexually harass somebody today. They go in with the noblest of
Mm.
intentions just to interact. Some of these guys can come from a background where they mightn't be that social. So they go into this Comic-Con setting and they're going in to look for people who might potentially like the same stuff they're into. So then they see this attractive woman dressed in a Star Wars costume. Automatically, the brain clicks. This is someone who likes Star
Yeah.
Wars. And they can sometimes get overly attached to that idea and want to make friends without realizing that being
Yeah.
too nice can come across as creepy. And with that, there's a
Mm.
story. One of my bigger events in Dublin was Dublin Comic Con, and we had access to a mannequin one year. And I had just done an hour or two in my Shadow Trooper. So I decided to put it away. A friend comes by the table and asks, did I put it away? I said, not fully. It's being put into the box. And she asked, would it be okay if I borrow it for a while? And I said, I mean, it's reeked in sweat. I don't. She's like, I have my own gear to put on underneath it. I just want to get out of this costume for a while. There's a guy that has been overly nice and very touchy feely, asking for hugs. She doesn't know who he is, and she just wants a break from the costume. I said, okay, right.
Mm.
Dragged the box upstairs, helped her get into the Shadow Trooper, put everything on, and off she went. I went back downstairs. She got about 40 minutes in before she came back and said, he knows it's me. He was being weird about it again. Can you help me get the armor off? I'm like, right, okay, back up to the changing room. I come back down and decided, right, there's no point in putting the thing away. I'll be back into it in a while. I put the armor onto the mannequin. The guy comes around and looks at the table and said, was the girl there? And I said, well, and he turns to the mannequin without even letting me finish my sentence. And he starts talking to the mannequin. And he was apologizing for being overly friendly. He was just happy to see another person, a girl, that's into the same Star Wars he was into. I wanted to interject and let him know that he was talking to a mannequin, but he insisted on talking over me and then went back to talking to the mannequin. So I asked
Okay.
a friend, what do I do? Do I let him continue talking or do I just butt in and start dismantling the mannequin? He said, no, no, let's see where this goes. So we both sat down and watched for at least 12 minutes that this guy was giving this mannequin his life story about how it is for him being a nerd, being a diehard Star Wars fan, and he just can't seem to mix and get girlfriends, and that he thinks she's really attractive, and that he would love to get to know her. I'm like, this all seems really sweet, but over the course of the 12 minutes, he was laying too much. This was like way too much for someone you've just met, especially a mannequin. I don't know what to know what the mannequin felt like. But I decided, right, it is about an hour till the event ends. I do not want to spend my time, at the last minute putting everything away. I walked over and I just took the helmet off the mannequin. He stops, he looks at me, and immediately does a 180 and starts walking away. I said, that's extremely rude not to say goodbye to this lovely mannequin you spent 12 minutes talking to. Very rude, very inconsiderate, and you didn't even offer the mannequin dinner. So he kept walking, did
So
not
funny.
acknowledge anyone else. He was bumping into people to get out of there as quickly as he could. And what made it even better, as she was standing behind the pop-up banner for the 501st, listening to the whole thing, and she had to hold in the laughter because she was aware that he thought that was her.
That's hilarious. That's so fucking funny.
And it's an example, like, you are going to get guys who are overly friendly. You're going to get guys who are
Yeah.
going to just cling to the fact there's an attractive girl into the same stuff they're into. And for the most part, it is usually innocent. They're not there to be intentionally creepy. They just have no social
Yeah.
skills. They don't know how to approach these situations and can often make themselves sound worse than they are. In other
Yeah.
scenarios, there's guys who will go out of their way to go into these communities and approach these people and be as toxic as they can. Like, some of them have no remorse or sense of like decency to control what they're saying. Some of them might just come out and start swearing. And in the communities I've seen over the years, you're going to get groups who are very well maintained, conduct themselves accordingly. But you're going to have groups that, from the outside looking in, are very immature, and they can often bring in equally immature people. And the younger you are in these spaces, the more at risk or vulnerable you are into these groups and environments where you mightn't be aware of the dangers, especially when it comes to cosplay. Like, you mightn't be aware the do's and don'ts. You mightn't be aware of just how many people will be at these events and what types of people you'll be bumping into. Not everyone will have your best intentions. Some just want to kind of wet their whistle, for lack of a better word. Photographers in
Yeah.
particular, it is important that when you go to a larger con or go to these events, it doesn't have to necessarily be a Comic Con, it can be a Renaissance festival, stuff like that. It's important to ask, and don't feel pressured or afraid when you're going to ask these questions. It's important to know, does the event have officially registered photographers? And if so, who are they?
Mm.
So now you know who are there representing the con as a photographer. So now you can check out this person's like Facebook page or Instagram to see what types of content they do, what types of photographs they take. Now you know who the registered photographers are. So when you go to these events and someone's going around claiming they are part of media, you can now check if that's true or not, and that's not some weird or randomly taking a photograph of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a really good like pointer and like piece of advice to point out, because there are people who will show up to conventions and just take pictures of people without being officially like affiliated with the convention, and those guys can be creeps. Those guys can be big old creeps. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. Something that I want to discuss with you today, as the viewers can probably tell by your wonderful, lovely accent, you are Irish. You are from Ireland, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the differences in culture when it comes to conventions between the United States and Ireland, because we were getting into that a little bit, and it seems like cons in the United States have a lot more problems than cons in Ireland do. Would you say that's correct?
Okay, first, you gave away my secret. How dare you expose me for being Irish? Secondly, cons in the States are generally much bigger than anything we have in Ireland. A lot bigger.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be, bad. Like, I've had really good experiences at cons in the States. I've met some really amazing people and amazing friends. But the issues I
Yeah.
have in the States is because there's a much larger pool to take from when you're going to these cons, so you're going to have a wider diversity of people. There's kind of more there to kind of worry about. So one of the things we have here is quiet rooms for the larger cons, and there's only three or at best four large comic cons in Ireland. And these large cons have a dress code for one. So if you're wearing, say, the bare minimum, or you're going in there with a very revealing costume, you will get asked to leave because the cons
Mm-hmm.
here are family friendly and they don't do the, revealing cosplays thing.
Yeah.
So you need to keep that in mind attending. If it's a case where you might be a bit overwhelmed by the amount of people in and out or near you, all the sounds, it can be a lot for new people getting into the Comic Con vibe or cosplay. they do quiet rooms. So they're rooms designated that you can go to these rooms and chill out and just take a moment to collect your thoughts and just settle. You don't have to worry about the hustle and bustle of a busy Comic Con. In the States,
Mm-hmm.
when you have a much larger group to pull from, you're going to meet incredible people. You are going to meet amazing people. But my experience is you're going to also encounter a lot more weird individuals and these weird niche
Yeah.
groups. So there's clicks no matter where you go in cosplay. There's going to be massive clicks.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are fresh off the bat going into cosplay, it can be very hard and intimidating to mix in these massive cons, and they don't make it easy. So you could be following whatever cosplayer you follow on Instagram or TikTok, and you might be a big fan of their work. You might want to go to a con to meet them. But by the time you get there,
Yeah.
they might have their clique around them, and this clique could make it almost impossible for you to even approach them. Not all of them are like
Mm-hmm.
that. There is some very welcoming and friendly people who are more than willing to take time out of the day to talk to you, give you pointers, give you tips. But at the same time, you will get people who don't want you there, who don't want you stepping on their toes, who don't want you to get involved in these cliques. And that's where, gatekeeping can come in on certain characters, certain franchises. The 501st, again, being an example, they can be very elitist. They can be very rude or hard to deal with. Not all of them, but they have that reputation of being in a very elitist group. Some of them can be lovely, some
Mm-hmm.
of them can be very considerate. But like the 501st, you're going to encounter other communities like that at these large cons. And one of the bigger things for me was there wasn't really a dress code when I went to these Comic Cons with friends. And going to
Yeah.
these Comic Cons, there was always these, oh, you're going to the after party. There's always an after party they're going to. And my first time going to them, I didn't really mind the after party. But then over time, it started to bother me that people who go to these cons, these cliques, when you go to the after party, you're seeing a completely different like event. It is darker. It is more of a vibe for those who seek it. But for those who are new to it or those who mightn't be for it, it can be extremely scary to go into these environments where you don't know these people. You don't know what you're being handed. And it is kind of more, for lack of a better word, intense in the States. You
Mm.
have more options for cons in the States. There's way more to go to than here. You have a wider pool to pick from what you want to involve yourself in. And I would recommend, if you're in the States, start small. If you want to go to a large con right off the bat, go to a large con off the bat. If you want to dress up at the first time, do so. But remember, you're going there to enjoy the con. If you want to get involved in cosplay and you want to start building your community page, your TikTok, your Instagram, cool, work on that. But stick maybe to the smaller cons so you get a feel for what you're doing, get a feel for the groups, and gradually, push yourself into the larger cons, into the larger communities if you want to compete, etc. But the States has more, in my opinion, to worry about. You're going to get it regardless of where you go. There is going to be bad groups, but family friendly cons generally have more rules. And some people don't like that. There's, like, as I said, the dress code, what you're allowed
Yeah.
to wear. But I think it's important to have this dress code so that one, it's a family friendly event. You're not going to have too many oddballs eyeing you up if you're a woman. Or two, when you go to these events in the States, knowing the event or researching the event to see what kind of people attended, what's the feedback from the event, and then if you choose to go further and go into like a group, a cosplay group, which is always good to invest your time and join a group so you're not there on your own, you're there with like-minded people. It doesn't hurt to ask questions and ask them. Don't feel pressured again or intimidated about asking who you're going to these cons with, what type of people are going to be going to these cons. Every community is going to have a bad apple, so don't think it's just a community. You're going to have good and bad people from most nerd cultures. It's just finding the right mix of people that you can vibe and be yourself around, regardless of having to worry, oh, is he going to be creeping on me, stuff like that. With the States, it's a bigger event to kind of push yourself towards, and by all means go to them, experience them. Just I would always recommend caution if you're attending these,
Mm-hmm.
because like there's bigger cons, like there's New York Comic Con, there is Dragon Con, San Diego Comic Palooza, and they're all different vibes. You're going to meet all kinds of people, so it's important to look at these cons and just make sure you know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, for sure. It's important to do your research, and it's very important to ask questions. It's very important to ask around to people who have been to these conventions before, as far as how they handle people who are making other people uncomfortable. Because some conventions are definitely better with this sort of thing than others. It's kind of like going out to a bar. Like, some bars have very good security, and they'll actually take your concerns seriously if somebody is being weird towards you. Other bars will have much more lax security, and they might not really do anything or take you seriously if something bad is happening or you are at risk. So it's always very important to know what you're getting into when you attend these events. And once again, go with a tight knit group of friends.
Exactly.
Go with people who you know are going to have your back. But yeah, another thing that I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit, and I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this sort of thing, but I feel like a big part of why you get such a diverse array of experiences, and you have fundamentally a different culture around conventions in the United States compared to somewhere like Ireland, is in Ireland, these nerd conventions are still very niche. In the United States, they're very large events. They are very popular events that a lot of people attend. And this really just comes down to, in my opinion, there being a lot more money in these conventions in the United States. Like, I was just looking at some statistics earlier today on like where cosplay industries are the biggest or emerging or whatever. And there's a lot of stuff in North America. There's starting to be more stuff in a lot of places like throughout Asia. But with the United States, there's really just a lot of money and investment in these conventions. And the fact that many of these cons in the United States don't have dress codes is part and parcel with this, because sex sells. The sexualization and fetishization of women makes a lot of money for this capitalist economy. So they allow more lax rules. They will often not provide the best protection to the people who are coming to conventions in these very revealing outfits. And in some cases, it would actually kind of run counter to the goal of these conventions, which is to make money, to enforce these dress codes, enforce like stricter rules, enforce more measures that would be keeping people safe. So when it comes to the differences in culture between like Ireland and the United States, a lot of it just comes down to the amount of money that's behind these things. Like, Comic-Con is a huge media hype machine. It's the place where you get to see all these trailers for movies and video games and sneak peeks of like comic books and stuff. But it's also about drawing a lot of people in, doing advertising, selling food, selling merch, all this other stuff. And more people are going to be drawn to these environments when you allow for very sexualized costumes. Does that kind of more or less track with your experiences?
You've hit the nail on the head. So, like, you're 100% right with in
Mm-hmm.
America, because a lot of the companies that would have produced your favorite comics or TV shows are more than likely within the States. They can pay cons for promotion to publicize their works and even get some of the writers in who are also probably American. So there's
Yeah.
more money circulating, more sponsorships going for these cons. So they're or they can spend more money to build up their event. Whereas Ireland, Dublin Comic Con was started by guys who wanted to host a con, and they are lovely men. Like these guys
Mm-hmm.
put a lot of hard work to build the Comic Con from what it was when it started into what it is now. So then you have the likes of MegaCon, which is a company. So comparing the two, one was started by a bunch of friends who wanted to start a Comic-Con in Ireland because there hasn't been one before, and they've been running it every year since they started. And MegaCon being a company that has sponsorships, they can get bigger displays and bring themselves in. So they're going to have a very different experience at either con, one being done by a company and being organized from the ground up from a group of friends. And both are successful in their own right. And obviously go to both. In the States, you have a much wider pool to look at. You have cons that are run by college societies. You've got cons that are backed by sponsorships. So you've got cons that are organized by local communities. So you're going to have a very different experience at each of these cons. And again, you're going to have a very different group of people. You're going to either have a great time, you're going to have a weird time, or maybe a weird mix of both. It doesn't really have to be all bad or whatever the case is. But the larger cons can be overwhelming. And the larger cons can almost feel like a massive like advertisement. You're going in there and they're handing you flyers. They're handing you all these, I guess, sheets of information. You're there to compete, like for the cosplay competitions. So it can be intimidating, but it's bigger. And in the States, it just circulates better. Like my first time to the United States, walking down Bergen Line Avenue in New Jersey, I was seeing people wearing like nerdy t-shirts and stuff, which back home when I was younger, you wouldn't really see it. Not because, people weren't into it. It was just, I guess, for lack of a better word, it wasn't socially acceptable. Like you'd have people wearing football jerseys or just clothes. You wouldn't really catch people wearing that sort of thing over the top. Like you wouldn't have it on display as much as you see people in the States wearing it. So it was a lot more laid back in the States. You could get away with wearing that stuff. You would see comic shops left, right, and center. You wouldn't see that back home. Like where I live now, there's one bookstore, and maybe if you're lucky, you can go in there and see one of the comics you want. But they don't really sell comics. If you wanted that stuff, you'd go to Dublin. So in the States, it's more widespread. It's more common. It's easier to access these things. So the States, you're 100% right. It's just more widespread. There's more involvement in the Comic Cons. They're backed by bigger groups and they're generally like more successful. You're going to have every group you can think of mixing at these cons, and they're generally for everyone. And these cons are on a bigger scale than what you'd ever expect to find, say, here. So, like, compare.
It's a much larger industry.
Much
in
larger.
The United States.
Much larger.
Yeah.
You asked about the clicks in the States. So these clicks, when you get invested in the clicks, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is important to know that, like, when you go into these fandoms, into these cliques, be them a Discord server or general meetups, it is important to know who you're mixing with, because it can often sometimes lead into really dark topics or really bad experiences. And I'm saying this like across the board. It could be anything, any fandom you can think of. For example, the Final Fantasy house, which is a well-documented story. But what comes up in that story is soul bonding, where people believe that they are that character reincarnated or bonded to them. And it's weird. Like, it's a weird practice. It can be very unhealthy. It can lead to very unhealthy relationships or dynamics within groups. And some people do take these characters to heart. Like, there are people in the Star Wars community that take passion in specific characters. There's people in the anime community that take passion in specific characters, video games included. And it is weird. It's an unhealthy thing to kind of consider, soul bonding yourself to a character where you believe you're this character and you want other people to think like you do. So with these communities that practice or get involved this deeply in soul bonding with these characters, you will often hear of grooming. You can hear of people trying to make you believe you're this character from whatever media you're claiming you're from. And it can be overwhelming. Like with the Final Fantasy house, it started over someone just looking for a house share for college. And when they got into the house, these people were trying to convince this person that they were from Final Fantasy. And it's bizarre, like right off the bat, but they were that stuck in the situation where their money was being affected. They were spending money for this person because they believed They were all part of this soul bonding thing. And it can be a mental and emotional drain. And it can even
Mm-hmm.
go into relationships where there was one story of a woman who believed her boyfriend was from a specific anime and that they were soul bonding these characters. So their Instagram was all these cute couple photos of the two of them. But later down the line, she came out and said that it wasn't her that initially sparked this soul bonding thing and a relationship. Their group of friends all believed they were part of this video game. I can't remember the top of my head, but they had a multitude of characters, and each of them was a
Mm-hmm.
character from the video game. And she went along with it because her best friend was part of it. She didn't want to upset her best friend or lose her best friend because of her own discomfort with what was happening. Her boyfriend was a
Mm-hmm.
mutual friend who had a crush on her, but she didn't reciprocate the feelings, but she didn't want to upset the dynamic she had with her friends. So she went along with the relationship, went along with this alias, went along with the soul bonding to the point it became too much and she had a mental breakdown. She deleted her socials.
Mm-hmm.
She took a massive step back and was afraid to go near the community again. Even in cosplay, she would not go back to it. Her friends kind of all ousted her for being weird and not going along with what they wanted, and her boyfriend tried to shame her online and used Reddit to do so. So,
Okay.
with the soul bonding, it's a very unhealthy practice, but it's one of many unhealthies that could develop in these communities. And it's important, again, to know what community you get involved with. And just from your own experiences, each person is going to be different, but to know what's okay and what's not okay. Because when you start involving yourself in these communities and they start going down that rabbit hole that is, you find yourself in weird or strange Discord servers or weird subreddits that potentially you're going to be exposed to a darker side of the internet or the community that you might not want to see. And in these communities,
Yeah.
you're going
Yeah.
to get very edgy humor. And you have to ask yourself, if you were walking, say, into a coffee shop and you're treating the Discord server like a coffee shop, would these things be perfectly okay to say in public? Obviously
More
not.
often than not, no.
Exactly.
No, not at all.
And then if you're going to say, okay, compared to a house party or just a party with friends at your house, what would be the
Yeah.
line that's too far? You need to set boundaries. You need to know, okay, I'm not okay with this. Take a step back. Like there are things that
Mm-hmm.
are clearly okay and there are things that are not okay, but soul bonding is one of many red flags within the community that you have to be aware of. And some were like, okay, not all communities have that, and that's fine. They're completely right. Oh, not all communities are that toxic. Again, you are correct. But it's important to know the red flags. Important to know that if you're a cosplayer or someone who's new to the franchise or new to the series or the culture of that fandom, it's important to research. It's important to ask these questions. Like, you need
Yeah.
to know what you're getting involved. Not everyone is going to be a social butterfly. Not everyone's going to energy, go out and be social publicly or meet up. Some people want to do so from the comfort of their own living room, their bedroom, Discord, whatever your media is that you want to mingle on. It's important to
Mm-hmm.
kind of know your limits, know your red flags, know what's okay for you. And with internet, like it is a messy and at times scary place. It's a great place to get information, but if you're doing it socially, you go onto the likes of Discord, it can be a very steep like rabbit hole to go down and you can free fall
Mm-hmm.
into this rabbit hole and not realize where you end up. So it is important to
Yes.
ask these questions, look at these communities, and YouTube being a perfect tool, you can search what other people think of these communities. It's always good to hear a different opinion. It mightn't be a
Mm-hmm.
great opinion, but it's important to kind of immerse yourself with this knowledge so you know what you're getting into.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned when we were initially chatting about this is the whole soul bonding thing is very popular in the has been hotel community, and I feel like it seems like a lot of the time with this sort of soul bonding thing and the grooming that goes on, it's particularly rampant in communities that appeal to a lot of young people. And when you have a lot of young, often vulnerable, often queer people, it can be a recipe for disaster if you're around the wrong types of people. If you are around people who are interested in taking advantage of somebody who's vulnerable. However, grooming can happen to anybody at any age.
Yeah, again.
It's ultimately what grooming comes down to is the power dynamic. So, like, let's say, for example, you are in an online community based around something that you are interested in, and there are higher ups in this community who maybe know the people who you would like to know. They can leverage that power against you. They can basically take somebody and put stars in their eyes, and the whole time you're not even really aware of what is happening. It's happened to so many people all across the internet and across IRL spaces. So when you're getting involved with these communities, it's important to keep in mind that not everybody is going to have your best interests in mind all the time.
Completely. With, for example, Hasbin Hotel, you would see like a surge of activity for it on TikTok. And
Yeah.
TikTok can be a great site to, push your creativity with cosplay or get your voice out there on the stuff and topics you want to. And that's great. That's fantastic. By all means, rock on with that. Be, your best version you can be. But with the soul bonding and with these niche groups, you will get people on TikTok and these communities that have a almost cult-like following where they believe they are these characters, and when they attach themselves to these characters, they often go too far with them. And it's not Has Been Hotel's fault, just people seem to radiate towards it. Hell of a Boss being another one.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're great in their own right, but you will get obsessive fans. And TikTok just seems to be now the outlet for these obsessive fans to show off their quirky behavior and try and normalize it to see if there's other people who think the same. And
Yeah.
it's generally unhealthy. Like when I started in the 501st, I had someone approach me thinking I was live action role playing as a stormtrooper.
Oh.
And
Okay.
I was like, no, I am just here to collect money for charity. I have no real interest in live action roleplay. But the amount of people who would assume because of the quality of the costume, they will kind of react that way. I have had people roleplay react to me as a stormtrooper. And in some cases, I'll play along. It's a vibe. It can be a funny experience. Like, you'll get a guy that walks up with his Jedi robe. Sometimes he's there with the kids. Sometimes it's not generally a guy. You get a group. I've had groups of tourists do it, groups of students do it, where they'll wave their hand in my face and say, "These are not the droids you're looking for." And the best response I can think to give is, "Very funny." You know what the next line is? "Move along." And it's a vibe. Like they react positive. It can be a pleasant experience. And
Yeah.
with the 501st, they generally have that approach. Now, there's people in there that can take it a bit seriously, and it can be off-putting, but you will get that in other groups as well. Like the cosplay
Mm.
community on, like, say, TikTok, if you go into those niche groups, they generally have a hierarchy where there's things you can't do. So if there's a character that someone else is doing and that's their thing, if you remotely consider doing that character, you're stepping on that person's toes, and now you've created a situation where they're going to bully you or just want you out of that group. You created drama.
Mm.
And that's where the gatekeeping comes in on specific characters where they think they do the character better than anyone else. The same happens with Spider-Man. Spider-Man being a very popular cosplay, you will get people who believe they do Spider-Man better than someone else. And seeing that a person in Spider-Man, they generally compete with each other. Which, okay, if that's what you want to do, that you want to do, but it can generally lead to a negative outcome. Here, when you see Spider-Man cosplayers, or even the UK or smaller cons, they start a little parade or whatever, and they recreate the memes where they're pointing at each other. So some vibe with it. Some people vibe with the characters. Others are there to promote themselves or think they are the main character, and these other people are just imposters. And it can go too far in these dynamics where your social media
Mm.
following becomes, your focus, or this character or persona you're representing becomes their identity. And from a, say, mental health standpoint, maybe they don't like being themselves, and maybe living vicariously through this character is how they get out of their own misfortunes. And, okay, everyone has their own way of coping, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not a great way to cope And it can be a hard thing to deal with when you go to these groups, to go to these cosplay groups or fandoms that who obsessively take an interest and soul bound themselves with these characters, becoming these characters, and even at times mimicking these characters' behavior traits, where they think
Mm.
then it's okay to be the asshole. Like when the surge of Deadpool cosplays out, everyone thought it was okay to act like Deadpool at a con. There was numerous accounts of sexual harassment because Deadpool in the
Yeah.
comics shouts boobies and goes to grab boobies, so therefore it must be okay for Deadpool to go to a con and grab boobies. Some people
Eh,
have common sense and don't do that, but not everyone
yeah.
has common sense, and some actually went ahead and did that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like you get it with the Harley Quinns, the Jokers, Deadpools. You're going to get it if the character behaves as such. People think it's okay then to behave as such. And again, it's where they're living vicariously through the character, where they can not be themselves for a while and get the attention they feel they're owed or deserve. And it's hard then to kind of approach that. How do you discipline that? How do you tell them off? You don't know this person's mental health background. You don't know how they're going to react to it. So again, it comes back
Mm-hmm.
to do your research, ask the
Yeah.
questions, see what you're getting involved into, what's okay, what's not okay. And generally just you want to make cosplay and going out to these conventions or going into these fandoms as an enjoyable experience. When I joined the 501st, I knew the rumors about the 501st. I knew what was going to happen with the 501st. I know they're strict. Did I expect myself to stay with them? No. The guys I met
Mm.
were some of the kindest people I have ever come across. And when I was having my struggles, these guys went out of the way to be there for me. So I didn't expect it, but it's an example of these people were the right people to be around. They took
Yeah.
consideration for who you were, what you're dealing with, and they would change their plans to accommodate you to make sure everyone was okay. Even their reputation in
Mm.
the local cosplay communities, everyone has a pleasant opinion of the 501st because they make
Yeah.
sure, like, perfect example, I'm not going to name names, but there was two women who were public figures, they were cosplayers, that had a really negative experience with another group, a really toxic experience. And this made it hard for them to approach a Comic Con because they were afraid of confrontation. Because two of their friends were in the 501st, they went to the 501st, and the guys offered up their secure changing room that should they ever feel threatened, intimidated, panicked, or whatever, they had a space to go in, sit down, and take a break from the rest of the con, and they could leave their stuff in there and nothing was going to happen to them. They were
Mm-hmm.
lovely people, and that's the type of mindset these guys have. They're there to make sure everyone else is having good. One of the quotes from the 501st is the bad guys doing good. So
Yeah.
often at times here, the staff will just say, if you're concerned or whatever, look for a stormtrooper. And
Mm.
they will seek out a stormtrooper, tell them what happened, and generally then you get heard by security or staff. But that's the vibe. In the States, in larger communities, you mightn't have that option. So it's important to do your research and know what you're looking at, even using TikTok to see, okay, what's the dynamic of these fandoms? And not all of them are bad, but the likes of Has Been Hotel has a very unique fandom. And not all of them are bad people, but you are going to get quite obsessive personalities in that fandom. Likewise with other video games and media. So it's just important to know what you're getting into and
Yeah.
knowing the red flags and knowing when to take a step back.
For sure. Another thing to keep in mind is that sometimes people will lie to you.
Yes.
uh, we've talked about this a little bit. Sometimes people will tell you that a situation is safe when it's really not safe. So always consider the source and get your information from people who you trust and who you know are looking out for your best interests.
When I did Spider-Man professionally, um, with Marvel, I enjoyed the
Mhm.
fact I got the chance to be one of my childhood heroes. And I loved wearing the costume. Did I know the dangers of wearing a Spider-Man costume? No. So not everyone's going to have the same experience, but Spider-Man, in my experience, is a very physical costume. To do the poses, to talk like him, to maneuver like he does, where families
Yeah.
who get photographs are going to want you to do the poses. So being vetted is a
Hmm.
very important thing. and more importantly, knowing what to use under this costume. So compression tights, compression belt, and a compression bodysuit. You know, the dancer's belt being the biggest one. You need to wear these things because you can't have your pieces just dangling there for the public to see, because that's really not okay. That is not what Spider-Man does. No, sir.
No, no.
And it's inappropriate, especially around children, families, etc. Just don't do it. Just common sense. No one wants to see your junk.
Yep, no spider bulge.
Exactly, and it's concerning that that became a hashtag that Spider-Man cosplayers use, Spider Bulge, to show off their thing, and it made me disgusted to even be associated with them. But to do it professionally means you have to take all this stuff into consideration. So when I did, I never expected, like when I do events publicly, we're out on a street, like your street side. I didn't expect people to grope me. I did not expect someone to unzip the side of my costume and get their hands into my suit. And because I'm in character, I can't break character and tell them off or just, no, don't. You can't break character. So I've had instances where I get groped from behind. I had a woman put her hand on my balls, thinking it was funny.
God.
But she's like, oh, like, what's wrong? Like that's funny. I'm like, no, it's not. It's fucking weird. But it became more and more of a thing the more I did those events. And I thought you'd think being in a stormtrooper, you were safe from it, but no. I had a woman reach into the gaps in the armor to undo the strap to get her hand down further. So it's not unique to a costume. Oh, sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you. So with Spider-Man, I've had instances where people got overly touchy-feely, and I can only imagine if it was a woman in the costume, it'd be a lot worse. But for me, the fact that this woman was brazen enough to unzip the side of the costume to get her hand in and to try and get it down further, and another woman tried to jump up on me, expecting me to catch her, to wrap her legs around my waist, but I didn't catch her and she hit the floor, and I stepped over her. She looked at me, he's like, I'm the weird one for not catching her. I'm the weird one for not letting that happen. And when I tried to voice these concerns originally to other Spider-Man cosplayers, they were like, why didn't I go ahead with it? Why did you stop? Like, was she hot? These are like, no, I'm doing this professionally. This is not okay behavior to do. And if it was a woman, you'd be like going with a mob to like crucify this. But because it's a guy, it's like, oh, bro, like it's fine. Was she hot? Like, no. And the same with the stormtrooper. The stormtrooper, I had a woman go up the side of the helmet and kiss the side of the helmet, leaving a lipstick mark. Like, that's weird. I had a woman try and get her hand in the gaps in the armor. Again, weird. And a woman who asked me, because of the material of the gloves, could I choke her? Again, weird behavior. I'm in costume. This is not things you ask a stormtrooper. This is not things you do to Spider-Man. And again, it just hammers home, like, you're going to meet people that aren't your usual cup of tea. You're going to meet all sorts when you get into these costumes, being a man or woman. And my own experience is you're going to meet weird people. You're going to meet people who are going to push boundaries with you. And they think it's okay because you're a costume. They think it's okay because it's just funny, it's just banter. But it's not. You could put yourself at serious risk. And even people in stormtroopers, that's like plastic, even they have to suffer this. Now, you mightn't always experience, you might be one of those people who never get to the fact that it does actually happen. And in my own experience, when you're going into these and you want to portray these characters, it is very important you know what is safe to wear and just know where you're going. Like, I learned a lesson of just being very careful if I'm wearing Spider-Man on a public street. If I'm collecting for charity, I need to be very careful of the potential people I could bump into, you know? And likewise, if you're a woman, if you were a woman in a Spider-Man suit, you'd have extra concerns to worry about, because not everyone's going to have your best interests at heart. You're going to have people who potentially might take an interest, might have a focus on you, they might single you out. Mightn't always happen, but it is important to just be aware, and there's no harm in taking extra precautions to be safe. And again, never go by yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're going to start wrapping up now.
Yep.
But first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Anytime.
This has been incredible. And I'd love to have you back on sometime to talk more about this stuff. Before we head out, I wanted to just do a brief recap of the tips and tricks that we have covered so far for staying safe at conventions. So let's just run through those real quick.
Okay, so the most important one is do your research. Just know what you're getting involved with, know the communities, and it's totally fine to ask questions. Don't feel intimidated to ask the harder ones. This is your safety. This is an area you want to go into. So it's totally fine if you want to make sure it's safe for you. Take the first step. When it comes to cosplay, again, just use the internet, use what you have in front of you, and research what you feel is necessary, be it the convention you're going to, the costume you are doing, or the community you plan to get involved with.
Yes.
And also know what your limits are. If you think something is not okay, you feel something's off, it's totally fine to go to someone else, get a second opinion, get a third opinion, whatever you need to do to make yourself feel safe. If something feels not okay and you're going to a con or someone is giving you a bad vibe, it's totally fine to voice that, go to someone, let someone know. Your safety is the most important part of going to these events, going to these cons, wearing your costume. You shouldn't be targeted specifically because you want to wear something or be at a con and enjoy yourself.
Mm-hmm. Trust your gut, especially if you're a woman.
Exactly.
we deal with this shit all the fucking time, and if something feels off, if something's amiss, then something is probably off.
Always use the buddy system. So if
Yes.
you're there as a woman, have more people there. Go with your friends. Always have a group there. You're safer with your group. And again, if you get a bad vibe, talk to someone, let someone know, voice it.
Mm-hmm. I think that pretty much covers everything we've been talking about and just our best sort of tips for keeping people safe. Once again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic episode. The show has been Blood, Sweat, and Strife. I've been May, and have a great day. Want to say bye? Do you want to say bye to the audience?
Oh shit! Bye. Apologies. I went to lean forward and my foot caught the headset and plugged the headset out, and I said bye and didn't. Bye.
It's
My
okay.
name is
It's okay.
Rex. Thank you for having me. I fucked that up.
No, that's so funny. I love that. I love that. We're keeping that in. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.